You probably think you know the story of Bosworth Field. You know, Shakespeare. Kings clashing, a kingdom lost and won. But what if that whole story is just really good PR? Well, today we're going to dive into a pretty radical new theory. One that says to understand what really happened, you got to stop reading the poetry and start following the money. It suggests one of history's most famous battles wasn't a noble war at all, but a cold, calculated corporate coup. So, on one hand, you've got the story we all learned in school. King Richard III, the last of his line, dies this heroic death in a massive cavalry charge, ending a dynastic war. But on the other hand, there's this startling new claim that Richard III was actually the target of a corporate hit, one that was planned, financed, and carried out by a family of London wool merchants. All right, let's go right to the scene of the crime. Bosworth Field, August 22nd, 1485. This is the exact spot where a king fell and an entire dynasty came to a crashing end. But maybe not in the way we've always been told.
The version we all know is, it's romantic, it's chaotic, it's something straight out of a movie. Richard III sees his rival's banner across the field and leads this valiant, all-or-nothing charge. He gets knocked off his horse and is cut down in the chaos. It's a classic story of medieval warfare. Or so we thought.
But the evidence we're going to look at today tells a very different story. It suggests Richard's death wasn't just some accident of war. No, it was the final, calculated move in what this research calls a merchant push, a hostile takeover of the English crown planned not by dukes and earls, but by businessmen in London. So the first question you have to ask is why? What on earth would motivate a bunch of merchants to try and kill a king? You don't just wake up one morning and decide to commit regicide. This whole story actually starts decades earlier, with what the research calls an origin wound. And that really is the million-dollar question here. Why would the Gardynyrs, a super wealthy and successful family of wool merchants, risk literally everything, their lives, their fortunes, their entire business, to take down the most powerful man in the entire kingdom? Well, this timeline really lays it all out. You can just see how this thing festered over decades. It starts back in 1448. The Gardynyrs are building a fortune in the wool trade. But then, in 1461, their political rivals, the Yorkists, take power, and the Gardynyrs pay a heavy price. Half their lands are taken away. That's the origin wound. For years, they kind of rebuild, but then comes the final straw in 1484. King Richard passes new laws that basically strangled their international business. So by 1485, this wasn't just about politics anymore, this was about revenge, and it was about corporate survival. So, with a powerful motive like that established, let's get into the how. How is this plot actually funded and organized? Because, let me tell you, a coup is not cheap. It required a secret financial system running right under the king's nose. The engine of this whole conspiracy was the Gardynyr Wool Syndicate. Now, on the surface, it looked like a totally legitimate, very powerful family business. But this research argues it was also a shadow command and control center, using its vast trade network as the perfect cover to move money, secret messages, and even weapons for the resistance.
And this is where it gets really, really clever. Their key tool was something called the Unicorn Seal. It started out as the badge of their noble ally, the Earl of Warwick. But the Gardynyrs repurposed it. They turned it into a suppression cipher. Basically, any ledger, any bill, any document stamped with this little unicorn was part of a secret, completely off-the-books accounting system. It was totally invisible to royal tax collectors. And get this, a letter from Warwick himself in 1470 confirms it, saying, "Send by bearer the tallies, sealed with the unicorn. Let no man see the seal but you."
And the sheer scale of this secret fund is just staggering. The syndicate raised an estimated £15,000. We're talking millions and millions in today's money. All of it came from dodging taxes, and all of it was hidden by that one simple unicorn stamp. This was the war chest they were going to use to buy an army and kill a king. Okay, so the syndicate has the motive, and they've got the money. The plot is fully funded. Now the investigation zooms in on the guy they hired for the final act, the Hitman. And what's amazing is that the killer's identity was basically hiding in plain sight this whole time. A source from the period, the Great Chronicle of London, says it right there in black and white. It was commonly said in the city that one Gardynyr, a skinner, slew him with a poleaxe. Not a famous knight, not a nobleman, but a skinner, a merchant.
And this wasn't just some city gossip. The actual archival records, the receipts, they paint an incredibly clear picture. First, you've got the name, Wyllyam Gardynyr, a skinner of London.
Then you have the weapon, a warrant from the Tower of London issuing 40 poleaxes directly to him just days before the battle. Then his presence is confirmed in a letter from a key commander saying, "The Skinner shall be there." Then comes the reward. He was knighted right there on the battlefield, an almost unheard of honor for a commoner. And finally, the manhunt. After the battle, the king's loyalists weren't hunting nobles. They were tearing London apart looking specifically for him.
So, after the king was dead, the syndicate didn't exactly throw a victory party. Nope, they got right back to business. This was the final phase of their plan, a hostile takeover of all the assets of the old regime. Yeah, the language this research uses is straight out of a modern boardroom. The rewards that were given to the Gardynyrs and their allies, they weren't gifts for being loyal. It was what's called a debt for equity swap. Think about it. The syndicate had put up the money for the invasion. Now they were foreclosing on the bankrupt Plantagenet kingdom to collect their payment. And you can see that cold, hard calculation right here on this chart. The Hitman himself, Wyllyam Gardynyr, gets control of manors that were taken from Richard III's supporters. The Gardynyr syndicate as a whole seizes industrial assets like dyeing pits, which are vital for their wool business. They lock down key real estate on the London docklands, and, in a perfect final move, they reclaim their ancestral lands at Exning that were taken from them all those years ago. This was a systematic corporate acquisition of land, infrastructure, and industrial power.
So, we've got the motive, the money, the killer, and the payoff. It seems like a pretty complete picture, right? But it leaves one huge, massive question just hanging in the air.
How did a conspiracy of this size, a massive financial network, hundreds of merchants, and the actual murder of a king, how did it stay buried for 500 years? How could all of these connections be missed by historians for so long?
Well, according to the author, the answer was hiding in the spelling of a single name. The big breakthrough came from a brand new research method the author calls Sir William's Key. By creating a way to digitally connect more than 67 different historical spellings of the name Gardynyr, names like Gardynyr or Valsar, into one single family tree, they could finally see the whole network. This key basically unlocked hundreds of documents, and it revealed this hidden syndicate that had been operating in plain sight all along.
And that brings us to the author's defiant conclusion. This entire thesis basically throws out the romantic stories we've been told and demands that we look at the hard evidence, at the paper trail. Was the fall of Richard III a noble tragedy? Or was it just the final bloody conclusion of a business dispute settled with a poleaxe and accounted for in a secret ledger? This research argues for the latter, and it leaves us with a final provocative thought. No more bedtime stories, only receipts.